reading about it, and it's really helped them, rethink how they think about customers and product development and so forth. So I'm really excited to spend the time here listening to you today. And so I won't take up any more of your time. Get right into it. Why don't you start?
Okay, thank you. Can people hear me okay? Okay, everything seems to be working. Yes, I'm Ries. Let me just start with some quick ground rules. In particular, I do not want your undivided attention. So please don't give it to me. I know it's futile anyway. Everyone has a cell phone, right? And knows how to use it for things like Twitter. So if you can take your cell phone out, actually put it in your hand, don't reach it, just reach in the pocket,
hey,
take it out.
Could you keep your voice down? I'm talking on my cell phone right now.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Dave. That's what I'm talking about. Basically, this is the only rule. I actually welcome people to Twitter and blog or whatever you want to do while I'm talking. All I ask is that you use the leanstartup hashtag, right? So leanstartup, singular. And that's actually a great way not only to talk to me and give me your thoughts, which I welcome, of course, your feedback, but to discuss with each other. If your attention starts to wane, that's fine. I won't be offended, I promise. And in fact, I read all the tweets that go on that hashtag, so although we'll have a little time for Q&A today, if there's something you're curious about or want to talk, that's a great way to reach me, and I'll do my best to respond this afternoon. So is that clear?
What?
Okay. Is that clear to everybody else besides Dave?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, good. And Startup Lessons Learned is the blog. Of course, I welcome you to subscribe if you find this interesting. So I'm really excited to be here with Geeks on a Plane. This is the second stop in our tour. And I've been really impressed with the caliber of the companies I've had a chance to meet with, and I look forward to meeting quite a few others. But despite the talent and the enthusiasm and some of the pretty cool technology I've seen, I still think there's some unnecessary bad news for us to talk about, which is that most of you are going to fail. And it's not personal. It's not that I think particular companies that I've met with are doomed to failure, although some are. That the absolute majority of startups that have ever been created have failed. And I brought a demonstration. Those of you remember Web 2.0, which I don't know whether to talk about in the present or past tense. I'm a little confused myself. But at the height of that revolution, right, which was going to change the way we all use computing and the internet, yada, 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 a graphic designer made this kind of patchwork quilt of all the logos, and they recently updated it. I was pretty excited, because this is what it looks like today. They've conveniently X'd out the companies that are no longer with us. Those are the failures. And they put green circles next to the ones that are technically a success. That is, the ones that where somebody made some money at least. And then the ones that are unmarked, the ones that are still with us. But actually, I think if all of our standard for what constitutes success or failure is just about did investors make any money, I think we're selling ourselves pretty short. And in a room full of entrepreneurs, I think it's actually very important that we start right away with what is success anyway? Right? Are we in this just to make money? Because I would suggest there are way easier ways and much more rational career paths to pursue if all you want to do is make some money. A lot of these companies that are marked as successes, I think, are actually failures, and many of the ones that are still with us are just limping along in the land of the living dead. I'd like to ask the question, how many startups are a success as defined by that they live up to the amount of human capital we pour into them, right? The most intelligent, creative, resourceful, determined people we can find, yes, some dollars too. Do we really redeem all that energy at the end? And I think if you look at our performance as an industry of high-tech entrepreneurship, I think our track record here is actually relatively poor. But the good news is, I think we could do better. And so, fundamentally, the reason I'm on these tours and doing these talks and I write the blog is because I believe, as an industry, if we can change some of our myths about how startups are supposed to be built, then we can have a different and more interesting success rate across the whole industry and actually redeem all that effort that we pour into it. That make sense? Okay. In this room, I assume this is clear, but I just want to start with what is a startup? Because usually when we think about startups, we're thinking about guys in a garage eating ramen noodles or something like that. And I actually think that's very confusing because what makes you an entrepreneur is not what kind of noodles you eat, but the conditions in which you operate. And so I just thought, especially with a lot of technologists, I've met a surprising amount of PhD entrepreneurs on this trip. So especially want to remind us that a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So it is not a technology. And it is not a deterministic, deductive reasoning kind of exercise. It is a management problem, which is how do we manage people who are trying to do something that's highly chaotic and extremely confusing, which, in case some of you have noticed, is not the conditions under which most normal people prefer to operate. And that's, I talked about on the panel this morning, the curse of startup advice. You get so much of it, and it's like, you should do this, no, you should do that. It's like, not only is it not internally consistent, but it's wildly contradictory. And a lot of that advice is context specific. So if you're in a certain kind of startup, it's helpful. But let's be honest, a lot of that advice is flat out wrong. It's not that it wasn't useful to the person who's giving it to you. It's just that they had a lot of success, for example, in a big company, where the level of uncertainty of the management that they're practicing is really different. And so when we transplant management practices from kind of normal context, from the realm of general management into startups, it tends to kill those companies. And so what I want to do is try to talk about some of the principles that allow us to make more intelligent decisions about how we should structure the process, people, and of course the technology of startups. The first key concept is what we call a pivot. So you ask the question, well, what differentiates a successful startup from an unsuccessful startup? And if you look, I certainly had this experience in my own entrepreneurial career, but if you look across all the startups that have grown up to become big companies, what separates the winners from the losers is not the quality of the founder's initial ideas. That's a big fallacy that is rife in the entrepreneurship community. Most startup founders, and I say this as a startup founder, I'm willing to admit, have really atrociously bad ideas. And that's true of the good ones and the bad ones. The difference is that the successful startups were able to refine those ideas over time in a series of iterations. And as we talked about this morning, it's all great to iterate unless you're going in a circle. In order to go something close to the direction of your vision, you need to take a structured iteration each time you discover that your idea has failed. Instead of having that mean the whole company fails, we do something we call a pivot. We keep one foot firmly in what we've learned while moving the other, changing kind of one element of the plan at a time. And so if you actually look at the stories of actually successful startups, you'll see this kind of strange zigzagging path. You know, starting with a really, really bad idea and then going through successively less bad ideas until eventually, you know, they become the online payment provider for eBay. And of course, then the rationalization kicks in. Right? Then the PR agents and the journalists and everybody goes to work, making the founders look like they were geniuses. And of course, retroactively claiming that they had that idea from day one. And so that's part of the reason there's this mythology out there, is that there are people who make their living by creating those stories. They're really good stories, they're very entertaining, you read about them in the press every day. But if you actually do your homework, you'll discover that's not how it works. And so the premise of the lean startup is actually relatively simple. If we can reduce the time it takes us to do those major iterations, then we'll get more of them per dollar that we spend, and therefore we're more likely to find product market fit before we run out of money and die. And I'll try to be as practical and as specific I can in the time we have now, and of course, I write about some of the more details on the blog, and I'm happy to talk offline. So far, is everything making sense? Okay, here we go. So let me tell you about two of the startups that I've been involved with, just so you can get some context of what this looks like in practice. The first one is called Startup Number 1. That's all. There's actually a few people in the room I discovered this morning who were involved with Startup Number 1, and therefore you can get the real story from them. But here's my take on it. I actually brought a picture, because I know I have some people here. I moved to Silicon Valley to join this company, and I was really excited. I had no idea what the company did, but I knew there were some really, really smart people there. They put me through a really rigorous technical interview, and then they said, okay, we'll show up at this address for an interview, in-person interview. And this is what it looked like. I don't know if you can see. This is a nondescript warehouse in the middle of nowhere in Silicon Valley. And you walk in the door, this is all you would see. You read the sign. We are building something that your friends will lust after and beg to beta test. It's not B2B e-commerce. This is during the bubble, so B2B e-commerce wasn't cool at that time. But we can't tell you what it is. But we can tell you who's on the team. And in startups, it's all about the team. I don't know about you, but this had me at hello, right? I was like, I want to join this guy. I have no idea what they're making, right? This could be a front for the CIA for all I know. And many of my friends suspected that for years. But the idea that if we could just assemble the smartest people, the most seasoned and experienced managers and entrepreneurs on the planet, how could we possibly fail? I call it the IQ theory of startup management. And here was the plan. So this is the plan for Startup Number 1. We're going to create this company with a really serious long-term vision. So this is not built to flip. We're going to do something really of lasting value on the internet. We're going to hire the absolute best and brightest that we can find. We're going to raise really top-tier capital. Talk about that IQ brain trust of a management team. We're going to build a product for mainstream customers, which means it's going to be high quality, and we will ship it when it's ready and not a day sooner, right? Because we all knew that mainstream customers would laugh if we asked them to use a product that was super buggy. We wanted to have a product that everybody could use, right? Not just the tech early adopters, not just the niche video game people, but everybody on the internet would want to use this product. course, that requires a world-class technology platform, but that's no problem because we got the best and the brightest. And the most important part of the strategy was to have a really aggressive launch by building buzz in the blogosphere with journalists so that when we finally came out of stealth mode, then we'd be able to reach mainstream customers. It's actually rational if you think about it. It's not just, of course, very fun to work in stealth mode. It's fun to have a big launch. But we wanted to reach mainstream customers. They don't read the niche blogs. They read the big mainstream journalists, right? So we needed to be in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Time Magazine, CNN. That was our target. And so we built this product in secret. That's why so many people thought we were the CIA. Nobody knew what we were doing, but we had a lot of smart people in this building filing patents. That's pretty much all anybody knew. So we did what I call achieving failure. This is not the most pleasant experience of my life. It's been about 5 years and $40 million turning this company from success to failure. But the reason I call it achieving failure is actually, this is the most important point. We failed not because we didn't execute the good plan. Okay, I got to convince you that those really smart people, those type A, high IQ management experts, we're going to execute that damn plan, okay? So we did build a really awesome technology platform. We did hire those people, and I know there's some people in here are familiar with the details of the launch that we had, which let me tell you was one of the best you could ever ask for. When this company finally came out of stealth, it was really in the mainstream media outlets. I mean, we had all the right journalists and tech bloggers saying, this is the future of the internet, this is the next big thing. You know, we had pictures of our product, screenshots on, page B1 of Wall Street Journal, business section, New York Times business section. I mean, really, the kind of launch everybody dreams about. And we didn't succeed, right? Even though we had all that press, even though we had this great product, we still failed basically utterly. Because we were crippled by what I call shadow beliefs, which were beliefs that were shared universally throughout the company, yet were never once spoken out loud or ever written down. We considered heresy to talk about the 3 things I want to share with you today. And just having met some of the companies today, I see these beliefs operating. It's not just me. So just as a thought exercise, think about, do you know anybody who sounds like this? Number 1, that we know what customers want, which I think actually sounds obvious. If you're building a product, you're going to devote yourself 120% to some new thing. You have to really believe that you know what customers will want when the product comes out. And there's nothing wrong with having that level of passionate belief. We talked about this morning. You have to have a vision, and you have to be committed to seeing that vision through to reality. That's why all the great entrepreneurs have what we call the reality distortion field. That's the ability to get people in their vicinity to believe things as if they were true that are not literally, strictly speaking, true. Like that people will want this product, which you hope is true, but you got to get everybody on board to really believe it. The problem is that they're not the only people who have that ability. There's a second set of people who have the reality distortion field. We call them crazy people. Right? So if you want to create a cult or you're some kind of sociopath, it's extremely useful to be able to convince the people around you to believe in a delusion as if it was the truth. The trick is, how can we tell as entrepreneurs, are we following a visionary or a crazy person? Right? Vision or delusion. That's what we talked about this morning. The essence of the kind of lean startup techniques are just don't abandon the reality distortion field. You still need it. But every once in a while, maybe one day a week, step outside of it and ask yourselves, this car that we're speeding down the tracks, just to mix my metaphors, is it about to go off a cliff? Or is it taking us somewhere we want to go? Just, like I said, don't only look at the ground, but just periodically check out the window what's going on. Second shadow belief, that we can accurately predict the future, which would get you committed if you said it out loud as a crazy person, but we operate as if this was true. So people who've written a formal business plan for VCs or some kind of investor, anybody? People who have a spreadsheet in the back of the business plan. People whose spreadsheet in the back of the business plan claims that sometime between year 3 and 5 you'll have $100 million in revenue. Same set of people, right? I have no problem with putting a spreadsheet in the back of your business plan. It's a good exercise, and I have no problem with you convincing investors they'll have $100 million sometime in the near but not too near future. That's all good. The problem happens when we start to believe the things we write down in the spreadsheet as if they were true. So in this company, by the time we launched, we had something like 200 employees before customers ever saw the product. Why? Because in the spreadsheet it said after we launch we're going to have this huge deluge of customers. And we've got to be staffed up in operations, in customer service, in marketing. But let's not forget engineering. We've got to have a scalable architecture or else those mainstream customers aren't going to be able to get in. And then that scalable architecture has to have a very sophisticated model for partitioning the load across our 1,000-server cluster, right? And those of, I know we've got engineers in the room, right? If your model for what user behavior is going to be is just a little bit off, what happens to your partitioning scheme? It doesn't, of course, work. So you get the worst of both worlds. You get the rigidity and overhead of this massive architecture combined with the ability to support thousands, not millions of simultaneous users. Shadow book number 3, if I can get the thing shown, is that advancing the plan is progress. And this is really the, I think this is the true curse of entrepreneurship. When you're in an unpredictable and chaotic situation, you can't control what's happening. Our tendency as humans is to focus our attention on the things that we can control, instead of accepting the reality of the level of chaos around us. So most startup boards, most entrepreneurs manage their success based on whether they're hitting the milestones that they laid out in the plan, which is what leads to achieving failure. Because you're executing the plan faithfully, but you don't have a process for asking yourself, is this a good plan? Like, is this actually a plan that is worthy of the energy that we're putting into it? And that is, I think, above all, the crippling failure of startup number 1 and of so many other high-tech products, is that basically we achieve the plan, we build the technology, but there are customers who want it at the end. I know that some of those shadow beliefs seem silly, and that's why I asked you to think about if you know anybody else who's suffering from them. I know you don't. Understood. But ask yourself, I think it's important that we judge ourselves as an industry, as individuals, as entrepreneurs, not based on what we say, because we're pretty good at talking a good game about entrepreneurship. Certainly in Silicon Valley, we talk a lot. And now as someone who talks for a living, I can tell you, we can say all the great stuff about our amazing values of openness and transparency and humility and innovation and blah, blah, blah. But we should be judged not by what we say, but by what we do. So I ask yourself this again as a thought exercise. If you really negated each of those 3 shadow beliefs, would you still think a plan like this was any good? I think this plan is rife through with assumptions about what customers want, about what's going to happen in the future, that are frankly irrational, but strongly believed. And if you can do that thought exercise for my plan, then maybe you can take it a step further and you're willing to do the thought exercise for your own plan. But I don't need to talk about that right now. Let me tell you about startup number 2, which is one I actually can talk about by name. This is InView. This is a 3D avatar social network that I was able to found in 2004 with some refugees from startup number 1, actually. And I brought some pictures just so you have something to look at, at least one time in this presentation. Actually, I was just doing this in Japan on Geeks on a Plane, and I pulled some of these screenshots. InView today is a worldwide phenomenon. It's a profitable company in Palo Alto. It's doing quite well. But that's actually not what I want to talk about. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is way back when, in 2004, when we started this company, what were we thinking? We had had this staggering and, let's face it, humiliating failure in startup number 1. And we'd done it very publicly and very painfully. And so I think that gave us the psychological freedom required to say, as the speaker said yesterday, for God's sake, let's make new mistakes this time. Right? We kind of done everything right. I mean, in Silicon Valley, this was a hot company. People said, this is a really smart plan. You guys got the brain trust. This is definitely going to work. That's why we could raise so much money.
Who was it then?
What's that?
Who was it then?
I'll leave that to you to do your own research. I don't want to speak ill of the dead.
Google.
So let me tell you a little bit about the plan that we put together for this second First element is that we shipped our product in 6 months. I mean, I'm talking from the day we incorporated the company to the day that we were in full open public beta was 180 days. And I don't want to be confusing about this at all. That product that we shipped sucked. Okay, it was really bad. It was every bit as likely to crash your computer as it was to give you a delightful 3D avatar, user-generated content. And you can kind of tell, right? People know the adage that time, quality, money, pick 2. Right? So we constrained the time, and we didn't have any money. So, right? So the engineers can do the math for what the level of quality this product was. And that was terrifying, because we were afraid that, oh my God, all these customers are going to come to our website and see our horrendous product, and they're going to, call the New York Times. The New York Times will come up with a big article that says, former startup number 1 founders, complete idiots in startup number 2, low quality product, right? We had this vision of what was going to happen, and of course, we didn't need to be so worried because actually nobody found out how bad this product was because we couldn't get anybody to download it. Right? Those of you who built a downloadable product before, it's not so easy. You just put this product out and say, we built a product, hello people, and people rush to the website and they go through the 10-step registration process and they download the 30 megabyte client, they install it on exactly the same version of Windows that you have in your office. Right? You can imagine all the steps required for anyone to discover how bad this product is, way more than you could ever imagine. So we actually got 0% of our customers through page 1 of the registration process. And we were worried about the 8th level deep bug in menu 4. And, I mean, our concentration. In startup number 1, we had spent 5 years putting a product in the market. So we thought when we shipped the product in 6 months, we had improved our concept of the minimum viable product by a order of magnitude. So we were really proud of ourselves. But in retrospect, how much of the time that we spent during those 180 days was working on something that any customers even were aware of, let alone had an opinion about? Very little. So we could have shipped a lot sooner. I remember we had this 3D avatar downloadable client, like very complicated piece of software. We could have shipped that, at least the landing page version of it, the download page part of it, like in the first month. So what's your excuse? Next, we charge money from day one. So in addition to all the normal reasons you don't charge for a buggy product, there were other bad reasons why this was considered a little bit weird. Because we're trying to build an IM product, communications product, a network effects business, in which charging would inhibit the growth of the critical mass that we needed for the product. And that's a valid concern. We were certainly worried about that. But we were worried about something else more. We were worried about testing the most critical assumption about our business first, which was that people would pay real money for virtual clothes, which I guess now is coming to be a fashionable idea, but in 2004 we were being laughed at people's offices because that was considered so ridiculous that anybody would want to do that. We wanted to test that assumption first. We also shipped our product multiple times a day. Invi doesn't talk a lot about its continuous deployment infrastructure publicly, but in 2007 they came out and said we're doing this about 50 times a day on average. And I just want to be super clear what this means. There's no branches, there's just the mainline trunk. You check in code, and 20 minutes later it's running in production. Okay, and that's funny because I can see the you see the wheels turning like back there for sure. Everyone over here, right? Wait a minute, let me enumerate all the things that could go wrong if any random engineer could just push to production anytime. And I'll pick some examples that I know some people are thinking about. Of course, they could take the whole site down. That wouldn't be good. They could regress old bugs. That's bad. My personal favorite, they could take the checkout button that you have in your e-commerce flow and remove the button so it's gone. So your business has become a hobby instantly. And we'll talk about if we have time later. Okay, they could do. You could catch that with unit tests. But what if they change the color scheme to white on white? Well, it's still there, but now nobody can see it. All those are possible problems or things that can go wrong. But we practice a methodology called continuous deployment that allowed us to mitigate those problems. They're actually very solvable if you put your mind to it. And so most of that 20 minutes is spent certifying the software to make sure it's non-harmful to the business. And once you do that, you unlock a whole new category of productivity that's not available under any kind of batch and queue release style process. In particular, there's a class of problems that take longer to prioritize than to build. So if you don't have to do monthly or, God forbid, multi-monthly release batches, then there's a lot of stuff you can just try and see what happens, rather than having to sit in a meeting and kind of think out theoretically which of 10 things might be the most effective to put your limited resources on. So it's a technique for unlocking the creativity of your team that is really powerful even when you're very small. We didn't do any PR. We didn't have a launch. We didn't want to repeat the stealth mistake that we made. So we didn't talk to journalists, but we did put our product out for customers. And the idea was we only wanted to hear from customers, paying customers preferably, and listen to their feedback. And what journalists thought, what investors thought, what random other entrepreneurs thought, we're going to try to tune that out as best we could and really focus on whose problem, how could we make their lives better. And I'm not allowed to say a lot about the results. Suffice to say, 2007 revenues are about $10 million more since then, and doing very well. So I'm proud of that accomplishment personally, but actually I'm more interested in this audience in talking about not just what a great person I am and how I built this amazing company, which I think is frankly not that interesting. Because just like a great poker player, I could easily have been lucky, right? So how do you know that what I'm talking about has anything to do with the success that I've had? You don't? Sorry. But I think we can talk about, well, what are some of the principles that underlie a lot of successful startups? And then you can, yourselves, without my help, try to adapt some of those principles to your particular context, and then you can experiment with whether they actually make sense. And if you try a little bit, you get a little benefit, then you can try a little bit more. And you can kind of teach yourself ways that you could improve your own business's success rather than having me try to convince you that random idea X is a good idea or not. Does that make sense? So here are the three kind of basic pillars of a lean startup. Commodity technology stack, which I will not belabor in this audience. A concept called customer development. The idea that we can have a parallel process to product development for finding out what customers want in a rigorous way. And then Agile product development. How many people practice some kind of Agile software system today? Really? Oh boy, well then, okay, we'll talk about that then, because So with Agile, we can at least build the software in an iterative way, but it needs adaptation from a big company context where it kind of originated to the startup condition. Kind of my technology stack, I'll just point out real quick, not only is this making it possible to have cheaper startups, but what makes lean startups lean is not how much money you spend, but how much learning you get per dollar. And therefore, it matters a lot that open source and commodity APIs, that kind of stuff, are making it faster to bring new product concepts to market. So even that 6-month prototype that we built in 2004, I think today we could build that identical product in probably 2 months, maybe 6 weeks. So even in those 5 years, a lot has happened to the underlying technology stack to make it a lot more exciting. I want to plug this book just on the topic of customer development since I can't go into much detail. This is the 4 Steps to the Epiphany. If you're an entrepreneur and you're not reading this book, then you're really missing out. bit.ly/4 steps. You should buy a copy right now if you have a laptop or phone or something. I'll wait a sec. Go ahead. And then Agile product development. Let me just revisit now what I've been talking about, try to get out of my idiosyncratic experiences and into some more schematic view of what this looks like in an organizational context. And to do that, just some background, this is traditional product development. This is how I was trained as an engineer. This is the waterfall methodology, where things proceed linearly from specification, requirements, collection, through design, to implementation, to verification. And it's fun to beat up on the waterfall methodology, because come on, this is a little bit antique, and very few products are successfully built this way anymore. But it's really important to understand that there's a context where waterfall makes sense. It is a context where the problem and the solution are both relatively well understood. And so you can accurately model what's going to happen in your control process. People with me on that? The problem is that we don't live in that world. Entrepreneurs don't live in that world, but not even anyone who's working remotely with high tech lives in this world anymore. The academic research on IT projects that are built with waterfall is something like 60% fail outright. So and then startups is even worse. So this is what Agile looks like. Agile was designed to mitigate risk in situations where the problem is well known, but the solution is unknown. So think about a big company that needs a new, payroll system, to pick the extreme programming example, where it's actually very clear what payroll system is supposed to do. It's supposed to do exactly what the old payroll system used to do, right? Because if the company can't make payroll, it's going out of business pretty soon. So there's a very clear understanding of the problem. It's just what's the best way that we should build it? We build in iterative cycles so that we kind of get feedback as we go. But we don't live in that world either. As entrepreneurs, we live in this world of the unknown problem and the unknown solution. And the killer with this is our unit of progress has really changed. So when I'm talking about Agile, the unit of progress is really a line of working code, right? So we strip out all the bullshit. We take out the meetings and the paperwork and the documentation, like all the unnecessary stuff that doesn't actually help us build the product. But this really got to me when I was a big Agile advocate at Inview. And we built this product that was like an instant messaging add-on. That was kind of our first attempt to interoperate with existing IAM clients to kind of avoid the network effect barrier to entry in the IAM world. And that strategy seemed like a really good idea, but actually it's a really bad idea. And I don't want to get into the reasons exactly. If anyone is in that business and is curious, we can talk about it afterwards. But I spent those first 6 months of my life writing the code to do IAM interoperability for Inview. And I did it Agile. It was well-factored, it had unit test coverage, it was well-documented, I kind of did everything right. And I thought, if I purge all the waste from my technology process, then that code will be useful to the business. And here's the thing that got to me. We eventually realized that IAM interoperability was a bad idea. It's an anti-feature. It actually drives people away rather than brings them in. And so we had to throw all that code away, even though it was well factored, even though it had unit test coverage, even though I had done a really good job, if I do say so myself, building the technology, the great architecture. I could go on and on about that, how beautiful that code was. And it was all completely worthless. If I had spent that time, on the beach, like sipping drinks, I would have contributed every bit as much value to the company as I did by writing it. And if you really think about that the biggest source of waste in product development is building something that nobody wants. If you take that idea seriously, I think you'll discover that a lot of the practices that seem obvious to us when we're in startups are actually very wasteful. And so I want to propose a new formal definition for progress in a startup. What we talked about this morning, validated learning about customers. Anything we do which contributes to our learning is progress, and anything else. I don't care how valuable it seems, right? No artifact, no dollars, no investor meetings, none of that stuff constitutes progress. And if you talk to entrepreneurs, I think what you'll discover, and maybe you know somebody who fits this description, we're very talented at keeping people busy. Okay, right? We are very good at selling the team that they should really be working hard, and we can sell investors that everything's going well, we're spending their money well. But we're actually, like when we go home at the end of the night, and we kind of sit there and think about, all right, I spent a day. I kept everybody busy. I successfully sold them on the vision. Did we accomplish anything today? I actually think it's a very scary question for most of us. Most of the time, all we know is that we hit our milestones. All we know is that we advanced the plan. But we don't actually know for sure that the changes we made to our product, the new features that we built, that whatever we did actually advanced the cause of the company. And I'd like to change that. So let me step back and just show this kind of in a simplified version. This is the fundamental feedback loop that powers all startups. And if anyone's aware of the work of a guy named John Boyd, this is based on the OODA loop that was originally created from maneuver warfare. The idea here is that startups are catalysts that turn ideas into products. Right? So we build something. But if we just end there, we can't learn. We have to measure what happens when we test those products against reality, collect some data, quantitative or qualitative, and then close the feedback loop by learning about our next set of ideas. Okay, that's pretty simple so far. But the big idea is we need to find ways to minimize our total time through this feedback loop, rather than spending all of our energy, as I think we do today, optimizing our time through only one leg. So much of the advice you get for startups is about how you can write code faster, or how you can measure more things, or how you can do more and intelligent whiteboard learning exercises. But each one of those three fallacies won't actually improve your likelihood of success. You have to do full turns through this feedback loop, right? So it's not an iteration until you've learned something. That idea, as a kind of a heuristic for judging the advice that you get throughout the week, I'd be very curious to see if you find it useful as it happens. Now, that's all very theoretical, and I apologize for that. We're under pretty limited time. There's a bunch of stuff that we could talk about in detail if people are interested. I'm just going to briefly mention these 5 techniques that are like very specific techniques that I believe optimize our time through the feedback loop. Right? We can change the batch size of our work. We can do continuous deployment, which I mentioned. We talked about A/B split test experimentation this morning. This concept of the minimum viable product. So far, the teams that I have met with, if I had to make one suggestion, it would be learn more about minimum viable product. Most of the teams are building way too much technology way too early, and then therefore delaying the onset of first feedback too long. And then a meta process called 5 Whys, which we definitely don't have time to get into now. So let me skip ahead here. Rather than dive into these topics, I'm happy to talk about them if there's questions. Let me ask you to do one more exercise. If you're willing to indulge me, I know this, just bear with me for a second, okay? I'd like everyone, if they're willing, to close their eyes, just for a second. Can you do it? Okay. If you're willing, just try to visualize one thing you could do to make your current company better, along the lines that we're talking about today. Could be something that I suggested, but if it's like, you're like, oh, that guy's an idiot, you thought of something better, that's fine. But I want you to visualize something that you could do tomorrow. Project could be completed from beginning to end and actually implemented tomorrow. And just hold that picture in your mind just for a moment. And that's it. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being here. I hope this is somewhat valuable. Just to be clear, startuplessonslearned.com. Certainly appreciate feedback on that. I'm on Twitter, and you're welcome to email me. There's a few events, a few of which are even in New York, in Europe if people are interested, and I'm happy to take some questions if there's time. So, thank you.
I'm Marcin from Codeology. I had a chat with Andy Bad, I know whether Andy's in the room some time ago. Oh yeah, when he was in Warsaw, and I asked him, because his point of view is that internet is too mature to just issue half-baked products, and you should have something that gets the user experience and gets the value that the customers will buy into. So how do you balance that against quick iteration or posting minimum viable product? How do you know which is where you are with the product right now?
Well, what's interesting is we agree. I think our goal is to build products that will blow customers away and they'll say, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'd like to know how we propose to do that. Right? If you already know for sure what customers want, amen, brother, go make a lot of money by building an amazing experience that they're going to want. The issue is that we don't know. Like the ability to just kind of sit at the whiteboard and imagine the perfect product is way way overrated. So ironically, the minimum viable product technique is not for building minimum products or minimal products. I don't believe in that at all. The point is, we put out this first product. We don't send out a press release about it and get Mike Arrington to give us his comments. That's irrelevant. What we do is we put it out there to get a small number of customers, enough to learn something about whether our assumptions about the product are remotely accurate or not. And in fact, most businesses, certainly all online businesses, can be proven in microscale. So even without all the features, even without millions of customers, you can demonstrate that the basic model works. And then you can build on features after that to eventually get to a wow product. I mean, I think if you ask Invue's customers today, they will say, Invue is a highly differentiated and really amazing product. And I would like to sit here and be like, I knew it all along. Okay, I knew what the features were going to be. I had them on the whiteboard on day one. But anyone who tells you that is flat out lying. That's my 2 cents.
Question?
Just stretching.
Oh.
Anyone else?
Any other questions? Yeah. Give me the mic around.
The heuristic that you laid out about kind of validating customer learning, about that being the ultimate measure of progress until you get money, certainly, comes over as very insightful. Wondering about methods of feedback from customers that you favour. So obviously, there's the obvious one, like how far down your site do they get? Are there any other feedback methods or more qualitative ones that you suggest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, although you don't want to get Mike Arrington's feedback, you certainly want Dave's feedback. Don't forget about that. Boy, there's a lot of techniques. I mean, the ones that we found most effective at Invue on the quantitative side, I especially recommend split testing. So I've written a lot about that on my blog. But also cohort analysis, so tracking the metrics of a given set of people over time, really focusing on that thing I said this morning, that metrics are people too. So like, not focusing on the vanity metrics, like we had 300 million page views, or like the total GDP of our virtual economy is like $1.5 billion. So it's other kind of nonsense metrics that sound really big and exciting, but you don't really know what they mean, and they're kind of abstract. Instead of, well, on a per customer basis, what did they do? So the average customer did what? What percentage of customers did a certain action? Those are the kind of metrics I think are more helpful. And then on the qualitative side, I really believe in one-on-one customer conversations. As humans, we are hardwired. A lot of our brain circuitry is about mind reading. So taking a human being, a face, a body language, a tone of voice in front of you, and trying to figure out what that person is really thinking. And if you don't have those kind of conversations with real or potential customers, then you're denying yourself access to that really rich data about what they really think. And I know that a lot of us are introverts, so it's not so comfortable to have a customer be like, this is stupid, why would I want to do that? But if you don't have that conversation, at least with some of your early customers, you're not really going to know what they're thinking. You got to say, if someone's an early adopter of your product, the question you got to ask is, what's wrong with you? Right? Why are you part of the 0.001% of humanity that wants to use my product? Like, there has to be a reason, and if you don't really understand that reason well, you're not going to be able to do a good job in those subsequent iterations. That's my 2 cents. Any other questions down here?
Over here.
Oh, good. Sorry.
The continuous deployment method. Just walk me through the safety mechanisms you have, because we're dealing with medical records, so it would be really nice not to get out in 20 minutes by making a mistake on a live site. So how do you put the safety measures into continuous deployment?
Yeah, just so everyone's clear, my claim is that continuous deployment leads to higher quality products, not lower quality products. So it's not about compromising our quality standards. It's about really being rigorous about, is a change to the product actually making it better or worse? I'll just tell you what we use at Invue. Obviously, in a medical situation, maybe you want to use a slightly different scheme. First line of defense is that each individual person has their own full replica sandbox where they can play around and test the changes they're making work. Second layer of defense is a series of automated unit tests, functional tests, performance tests, kind of the full range of automated tests that you can run in a continuous integration environment. Every commit passes every test, or it doesn't go out. That's the ironclad rule. If you don't do that, the rest of what I'm going to say makes no sense. The next layer of defense is what we call the incremental deployment process. So instead of just saying, all right, on time 0 we're running version X, and then at time 1 we're running version X plus 1, we'll incrementally roll it out to server by server, and then test as that's happening in an automatic way whether things are getting better or worse. So if there's a catastrophic problem, it can be automatically reverted. next step is a series of real-time alerts that go to people's pagers for like when stuff goes wrong that the system didn't anticipate. And the most important part of this is a process we call 5 whys. That's what I mentioned but didn't have time to talk about. Please, if you're interested at all in more intelligent software development process, please Google 5 whys. You can read my writing about it, and there's other people too. The idea is that if anything gets past one of our levels of defense, we're always, every time, going to do a root cause analysis to understand why didn't we catch that sooner. And every time it happens, we will make an incremental investment in preventing it in the future. So that we have a natural feedback loop between our current level of quality and the level of work we put into prevention. So we can stop having those totally fruitless arguments about should we build features or should we invest in quality. Right? Like it's not either or. For the whole life of your company, hopefully, you'll be investing in features and quality. But what's the right level of preventative quality architecture? There's no right level. But if you use 5 whys, you can use those two things, link them into a feedback loop, and kind of get automatic balance. Does that kind of give you a quick summary of this? I have a lot of writing about this on my website if you're interested.
Last question? Yeah.
Doesn't mind.
Dan from Plugin SEO. How far ahead and how deep do you plan? So obviously you get it out in front of customers, but do you have like a real kind of long-term forward plan as well?
It's a really good question. There's no such thing as the plan, right? You plan at different fractal intervals, and it's important that you have a periodicity to each of the kinds of plans. So all the way down to a daily stand-up meeting, I think is very important for planning what you're going to do today. We would organize our work into a bi-monthly cycle, so we would use a 60-day time cycle. You practice Scrum, I recommend strongly 30 days, some people do 2 weeks, but there needs to be some kind of current iteration time life, where during the iteration people can be heads down implementing and feel confident that at a known time in the future you'll kind of go heads up to say, is it time to pivot, or should we keep going the direction we're going? And then you've got to have some kind of like longer term, annual plan, I think is as long as you can conceivably plan. But really, the highest level is, what's the vision? Right? Why did we get into this business in the first place? And what kinds of businesses are we not willing to do? Right? So if you can say with clarity, even if we could get really rich building this business, we wouldn't do it because it's not consistent with our corporate mission, then you know what your vision is. And if you can't make that kind of declaration, then you need to keep exploring. So those decisions you make at the different fractal levels kind of trickle up and trickle down. They have important interplays, but there needs to be certain definite intervals where you have that, you do that thinking, so people aren't burdened with it constantly. So like the vision, the long-term vision can't change every day or people get whiplash.
Great. Thank you
So
so
yeah,
much.
thank you all very much.